Good day and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rassool, and today we are going to be speaking about one of my most favorite topics, writing. Now, for those of you who don't know, I started my career in print journalism, and so for almost 20 years I've been writing other people's stories. But today's show is not about how to become a writer or how to become a published author. Rather, we are going to be speaking about writing and healing. Now, after the break, we're going to be chatting to Dawn Garisch, who is the founder of the Life Writing Collective that offers courses on life writing and poetry. We're going to be discussing what is life writing and how writing can help you better heal yourself from traumatic experiences. But before that, we're going to have a look at a short video where former participants of the Life Writing Collective courses speak about how writing has changed their lives. Let's have a look.
The Life Writing Collective, I think, has a powerful role to play in our healing as a nation, because we don't just get to tell our own stories. We get to hear each other's stories from a very raw place of personal truth. And when that happens, there's this amazing moment of identifying with someone that on the surface you thought was very, very different to you, you know. And that's what I think needs to happen a lot more in our country.
My name is Dawn Garisch, and I am a co-founder of the Life Writing Collective, which is a non-profit organization. And out of my own practice, I've discovered how helpful writing is to help one reflect and communicate better, manage your anxiety. And I've taken that practice and am teaching it to other people.
Attending the workshop, the writing, it was for me a healing process and also a sharing time.
There were queer women there from the Fees Must Fall movement, radical, outspoken. There were other people of color, and mixed up with sort of older people that could afford to self-finance themselves coming to the course, and this made for an incredible dynamic. The diversity there ignited everybody to not be contrived, to not fall into stereotypical feedback and questions of one another.
Especially if you've lived kind of a life that has been curtailed by institutionalized violence, really. You know, apartheid, racism, sexism, ageism, all these isms that divide us are there also to keep the lid on what is possible in terms of community and personal growth. So we're lifting the lid off with this approach.
We need to know each other's stories. I think that it's vital that we know each other's stories so that we can get a better understanding of the human condition.
Yes, I'm hoping that the courses and the book that's in its second print now will attract people from on that level too. People who want to lead, young people who want to lead in change in the country, and that understand that writing and creativity and memoir writing and storytelling is a way to lead within their communities.
The LRC is a group of people who have experienced what writing can do, like the transformation it can have in their own lives. And they are now working really hard, most of the time volunteering their time to give these tools and give this platform and this art of writing, of life writing, to people who cannot afford.
The Life Writing Collective isn't a course. It's not a short-term program. It's a community of people who hold a safe space for others to share the journey of their life in their own voice. And I think that's a very powerful thing. And as I said, as somebody who works to create inclusion in a country that's as diverse and often divided as ours is, I think that's a critical missing in our society.
In African continent, a child is not raised only by the family but the community. So that we need this community to grow and to work hand by hand, like togetherness, and to keep it alive. Because it's a noble project that will touch many lives. Is a baby that needs to grow. And when it is a baby, the baby needs support. And that is a financial way so that this baby can grow.
That was a short video by the Life Writing Collective where participants of their courses spoke about how writing has changed their lives. Now we are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching the Womxn Show, and today we are speaking about writing and healing, and joining me in studio is Dawn Garisch, who is the founder of the Life Writing Collective. Dawn, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lenina. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your viewers.
So Dawn, I'm so excited about this conversation. I am also a writer / journalist, but the Life Writing Collective does life writing and poetry courses. So I thought we could start with a small introduction. What is life writing, and why did you start the Life Writing Collective?
Well, life writing essentially is revisiting events and situations in your past and writing them down. But writing them not from the what you know part of the brain, the logical, rational, anecdotal, hope, fear brain, but finding way into the creative brain, which has much more information than our smaller, brain that thinks it knows what the story is. If you write from the creative side of the brain, new information arrives on the page, which can give you a completely different perspective of what happened. So the idea with life writing, because I am a medical doctor as well, and I'm very interested in the stories that people tell themselves, which are either helpful or harmful. So, your life is actually shaped by the story you tell yourself. For example, I used to say to myself, no matter, I didn't even know I was saying it to myself, no matter how hard you try, it'll never be good enough, which is a terrible story to live with and by. So, becoming aware of the story you're telling yourself and how you can undermine yourself, and burrowing into that story and finding out where did it come from? Is it even true? And then reimagining what your life might be is the idea with the course. So it's really about recovery and discovery in the service of living a more creative life, a less anxious life. C.S. Lewis, the writer, said that you can't go back to the beginning and change what happened, but you can start from where you are and change the ending. So, we've already got an idea what our story is and where we're going, but actually it's too small. That's a story that wonderful talk that Chimamanda Adichie has on YouTube, yes, where she talks about the danger of the single story, and she's talking about the national story, that people have an idea about Americans or Chinese or South Africans or Africans, and that story is very often very prejudicial. So she was pushing back against the idea that there's one story that explains a people, but I think that it's also true of individuals, that we've got one story about our lives, which is way too small. So we give people the opportunity to explore and expand and get curious about the stories that they're living, so that they can live in a more curious, more relaxed, more creative way. Does that answer the question? Oh, why I started the Life Writing Collective? Well, I was running these courses. I inherited them from Anne Schuster, who was a big writing doyen. when she got ill about 10 years ago now, and I was already a writer, and I was running a course in creative method, which she knew about. And I was writing a book called Eloquent Body, which is about, part of that is about the creative process. So she approached me, she said, I've got a full course of memoirists, life writers, and I can't do it, I'm not well. So would you take it over? And I nearly said no. But fortunately, that little voice in your head that knows better than you do said, do it. And it has changed my life for the better in about 20 different ways. So I started that and I ran it just under my own name for about 8 years. And then somebody who'd come on the course and was coming to regular follow-up meetings, I was complaining to her. I said, I really want more sponsored people in the room. So we have the ideas inclusivity and diversity. So I want to raise funds to have more people in the room who can't afford the course otherwise. And I really want to get the opportunity to publish the incredible stories that come out of the course, true stories from Southern Africans who have enough courage to write about what happened to them, to stand up and say, this is who I am, this is what happened to me, and it can be helpful to other people. So I wanted to get this writing into the world. And so Lucy said to me, well, let's start a nonprofit. So we did 4 years ago. We started the Life Writing Collective, but it's RIGHTING. So you write about your life in order to write your life, like a yacht that's about to capsize. You write your life. So and since in these 4 years we've brought out our first anthology. It costs a lot of money to bring out an anthology. We're still trying to raise funds to bring out another one. But just to say at this point that the idea of the course is not come on this course in order to be published. There are lots of writing courses that advertise themselves like that. Our mission is come on this course because regular creative practice is good for your mental health. And your mental health affects your physical health and your relationship health and your societal health and your environmental health. So primarily you write for your own sake. And later on, you might decide to put it out into the world, but it's certainly not a prerequisite. That was a long answer.
It was, but it was great. Thank you. I mean, and there's so much there. Like my brain is going in so many different directions. But I do want to say I loved what you said in the beginning also about the self-critic, that you brought out. And that, writing gives us a way to explore those narratives because... one of the second question I had planned was that I often joke that I was born with a pen in my hand. So I was just a natural reader and writer. But the thing I struggled with when I was young, not even just when I was young, but later with journaling, how it was depicted on TV. And I think this speaks to, the danger of a single story. I just had a sort of a single context for what journaling is supposed to be, was young girls writing about their day. So it was like, your traditional dear diary. This happened today, etc. And it always felt so empty and flat for me. So I would always sort of just give up because, I've just written what's happened. But I loved what you were talking about when I was looking up the Life Writing Collective and looking up, what life writing really is. And as you explained it, rather than just writing about these events, it's more about writing about how you feel about this event or what your thoughts are around this event or your own context. And so I wanted to ask, for those who don't know, is there a right way to write? Or is, some people talk about free writing, and I know in therapy also they use sort of free writing. Just sit down and write whatever comes to mind. Can you give us an idea of just writing, I think?
Sure. So the thing is that journaling is usually just putting down what you know about your own life, about your day, whereas creative writing, you're stepping into what you don't know about yourself and your day. So very, very different things can arrive on the page. We are trained into, you need to know where you're going and you need to be right and there's only one answer and you must be logical and you must be rational and you must do away with paradox and contradiction. But all those things stand in the way of creativity. So creativity is about opening the box, being curious and really deeply understanding that we only know a small part of what's going on. So there are ways in the course that we kind of trick people into finding their way into that wellspring. Once you step out of that, it's almost like a straitjacket of I'm only going to write about what I know about today, as opposed to, and that's writing out of the head. It's writing out of the logical, interpretive, analytical mind, rather than writing out of your lived sensory experience. So getting back into the memory of what happened, and memories are a physiological event. We remember things that have emotional charge, and emotion we feel in the body. So going back to a scene that moved you, that made you happy, made you feel guilty, made you feel sad, made you feel exuberant, going back to that moment and describing it in sensory detail, new information will arrive that you didn't know, or didn't know you knew. And that's when it gets really exciting, because you think, whoa, there's something else going on here. It gives us courage for living as well, because, I do think that the body's trying to heal, but we get in the way, that the psyche is trying to heal, but we get in the way. So how do we get out of our own way in order to allow the process or the flow to unfold, so that we can find out, who am I? What am I doing here? Where should I go from here? And it's not only writing, I have to say, that any regular creative practice will help you calm down, help you be in the moment. That whole mindfulness thing will give you pleasure. Why don't we give ourselves more pleasure? It's a good question, right? We'd rather go and, I don't know, tidy the house again, rather than sit down and write your memoirs, So that thing of, I think of it as, brushing your teeth. Making the time to brush your teeth is dental health, and making the time for regular creative practice is about mental health. So it's not a luxury. It's not something that we give away to the professionals and say, oh, I can't do this. It's not about the hierarchy. There's another image that I get from the 12-step program. Beautiful image of get down from the hierarchy, get down from the ladder of the hierarchy and into the circle of community. So the trouble is that we're trained in this thing of, you're either going to be the best or you're going to fail, that thing. And we really are pushing back against that idea that there's only one way of doing things and you better be right. So to the thing of we all got our own unique way of writing. There are only seven stories in the world, they say. It's all about how you write it. And in that process, you'll start growing your own voice, growing confidence, growing pleasure, getting curious, all these things. You can't feel fear and curiosity at the same time. So that practice of growing your own curiosity about your own life and the people around you, rather than that judgment mind, rather than the judgment mind, the hope, fear mind, is incredibly helpful. It's a life skill, and we are born with this life skill. All of us are born creative. That is fact. That is neuroscience. This is the work of Jaak Panksepp, who's a neuroscientist who devoted his life to looking at the neural pathways that mammals are born with, otherwise they die. All mammals have to be able to play as soon as they are born, otherwise they can't learn. So you can't learn to play because you have to play in order to learn. And play is the foundation of creativity. Wow. And yet our education system says we've got to sit still in the chair and learn your ka off by heart. Yes. That is not play, and it's not the best way to learn.
Exactly.
So we also, I can just say this okay. Quickly, insert this. So it's also about encouraging people to reclaim their birthright. I feel like an activist, so you go back and you value your own creative process. It is there to help you manage your life more effectively, more creatively, more curiously. And yet we're talked out of it at a very early age. Sorry, Lenina.
No, it's okay. I mean, and all of those things are so important. You're making me think about, and I think I mentioned the last time we spoke about, it's a single story again. For me, my context for writing came from school essays, and it's got that,
Yes.
that binary right or wrong thing. And if you veer out of the rules that they have sort of given you, you get a big X. And so we're almost socialized to suppress that creativity. But I just want to tag on to what you said at the end, really, about a few things, which is all of us are born to be creative, and encouraging people to reclaim their birthright. I have lots of conversations about women. We struggle with what I call toxic humbleness. And, when I was thinking about life writing, I was thinking, it seems like I don't like the word selfish, but it seems like it goes against the grain of what women are socialized to do. We're not supposed to think about ourselves. Writing about yourself seems very self-centered. And so it becomes this barrier. I feel it also. I mean, I have spent 20 years writing other people's stories, so I am a writer. But it is so difficult to write about myself and even to think about publishing that. But we do see women coming out and sort of, I think, as you're saying, reclaiming their birthright, telling their stories, making a bold, which I think is a revolutionary statement, that I matter, that my story matters, that I'm part, as myself, I'm part of sort of a broader story. And so I think it's great that you said that. I did want to ask also, you're a doctor as well. And so when you speak about it being about mental health, and better mental health leads to better physical health, I did want to ask, one of the ways that writing has helped me, so journaling, not professionally journaling, that is my way to get things out of myself. So if I were not writing it down, whether anyone reads it or not, my other strategy is to bottle it up and not talk about it. So does writing, help with that as well? And I do want to say that when I was doing, again, some research on it, one Wikipedia entry on life writing mentioned that researcher shows that there are positive effects. And so I guess I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, so there were a couple of things there. I mean, first of all, you said about women not, looking after other people, and it seemed to be selfish if they look after themselves. I mean, there's obvious problem in that. If you don't look after yourself, you can't look after anyone else, for starters. Secondly, there are writers that I read very early on, and I have to say that most of them were women, who really helped me. So putting down your own story helps yourself. If longer term you choose to put it out into the world in whatever form, whether it's a blog or getting published or submitting to a journal, you might well touch somebody's heart that really needs to hear what you have to say, to give them courage and give them sort of a rope to hold on to in their own lives. I wanted to mention Virginia Woolf, who's in her incredible book called A Room of One's Own. She's talking about women in the service of men in the 1930s, and she talks about killing the angel in the house, which she had a point. She's talking about killing the part of herself that is always in service of the husband and society and what other people want, in order to have time for herself to write. I don't think that you can kill the angel in the house. I think you've got to, because the angel in the house is also that critic that says, "Oh, you're being selfish. You could be doing something more important than writing, and nobody's going to read it anyway," or whatever that inner voice says. I think that what we encourage people to do is to humanize that inner critic. So the inner critic starts off as this petty tyrant, and we've all got one. Astonishingly, we all undermine ourselves. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. There's always a part of you that you walk into the room and you think, "Oh, am I dressed funny? Am I going to say the right thing?" Or whatever your inner critic says, to undermine you. And but if we work with that inner critic, it can become a helpful editor. And we need a helpful editor, so that when we look at our work, we can say, "Oh, my darling, this is really interesting, but maybe you don't need that first paragraph." So it's a humane engagement rather than a undermining bully, actually. The other thing that there was something else that you mentioned. Sorry, I lost my own track.
Oh, yes. Dawn, it was about getting, holding on to things, and that writing
Yeah.
is one way of getting it out. And,
Yes.
and that
So
is
I
healthy.
think that, it is an act of faith that if you start on this journey, we are automatically afraid that if we go to a difficult place in our writing, something that's traumatized you, that it's going to make things worse. In my experience, through 10 years of running these courses and through my own writing, if you are supported either by a group or by a therapist, or often you do need the support of somebody just to help you emotionally through a difficult patch. Writing it down helps you to put it down, helps you to change the relationship with what happened. Often we feel like victims of what happens to us, and terrible things happen to people. And I'm not minimizing that at all, but there's something happens, and we don't understand it properly, but this is what many people report, and we've just done a research project looking at this.
Dawn, I'm sorry, I need to cut you there because we need to go to a break. But as soon as we come back, we're going to pick up on writing and healing.
Thank you.
We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You are still watching The Womxn Show, and we are speaking about writing and healing. And I'm in studio with Dawn Garisch, who is the founder of the Life Writing Collective. And we have been speaking about life writing, which is essentially writing about your own experiences. And Dawn, we went to break earlier. You were speaking about writing about difficult things, and especially traumatic things in one's life, and how I think the last one of the things you said, if you are supported, writing it down helps you to put it down. So maybe we could just carry on from there.
Yes. So I think the task of life is to come to terms with what happened to you. And of course, one must change the things one can, and that includes politically, people are born into terrible situations like apartheid, like, not good enough sanitation, like lack of housing, lack of access to healthcare, all these things we need to address. But in the end, it's exploring your own relationship with the circumstances you are born into. You can be a witness and an activist to your own life and to the times in which you live. And even getting that out into the world can be helpful. But it's also about changing the relationship, because if we endlessly feel like a victim of what happens to us, it makes it very hard to act, to have the confidence and the empowerment to act. And even picking up a pen to write gives you agency. And then when you start writing out of the creative brain, when that other information that you didn't know arrives on the page, it gives you courage that there's something bigger than what you know that is helpful, So that thing of changing your relationship with what happened to you and crawling out from underneath the weight of the trauma and the disappointments and the the real difficulties that people live with in community. The Life Writing Collective is very much about, let's have a community that supports each other, that we have lots of different people in the room, so that our inner walls can come down, the ways that we split ourselves off from ourselves, but also the outer walls, that all those isms in society, the racism, the ageism, the nationalism, the ableism, or the gender issues, we as soon as you are in a room with somebody else and you hear their story, I find that I'm always wrong. Somebody walks in, you've already got a story about them, and then you hear their story and you realize, whoa, I made all these assumptions that were not true. So the creative brain is also the association brain. And I'm really interested in this because we don't know enough about it, I don't think. But the association brain can be the prejudice brain, but it's a fixed association. So, for example, if somebody had a bad experience with a man with a mustache, then maybe for the rest of their lives, unconsciously, somebody with a moustache walks into the room and you think, oh, here comes trouble. And then you start behaving weirdly, and then they start behaving weirdly because you're behaving weirdly, and then you've written your own script. Yeah. So the idea is examine those associations. Maybe they're not all true. Maybe they aren't true at all, that not all men with moustaches are violent, for example,
Yeah, so
but
like
that
bitten
extrapolates
by a dog.
to all sorts of things. Sorry?
So like if you're bitten by a dog and you become afraid of all dogs, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Dawn, I mean, do you want to finish?
Yeah, just to say that, so the creative brain, the association brain, can be very loose and inclusive and exploratory, not this fixed association which is damaging. We're opening it up so that it can become healing and helpful and curious.
I loved what you said about, picking up the pen gives you some form of, I don't want to say control, but you mentioned courage and empowerment.
Agency,
yeah. Yes. And I'm reading a book actually right now around locating your power by, he's also a psychologist named Chris Johnstone. And it was great because he also, without minimizing the things that have happened to you, he said by working your way through how you are feeling and a lot of the things that you have said, and through writing it down. I often say, your first step for almost anything is to write it down. If you're going to go shopping and you're making a list, you're writing it down. And so, I absolutely like that because he roots empowerment in taking any action, taking an action. And so picking up a pen is also taking an action and sort of, getting busy to try and figure something out. I also wanted to say, I've always said to people that they should journal. And still when I meet people, I say to them who are going through difficult things, as I do with the show, which is around gender-based violence, I often encourage them to write it down. And people are afraid of writing. They're afraid of grammar. They're afraid of language. I think we think of it as we were taught it in school. As an essay,
exactly.
There's a right way to do it, there's a wrong way to do it. It makes us sometimes even, when you start it out, you can physically feel self-conscious, even if you think no one's going to read it. But the Life Writing Collective does, as you said, there was an anthropology, you do publish pieces, but the course is not entirely about publishing. I think I want to get to a space where I just want to tell people that it's okay to write without having the goal in mind. You don't have to want to be a writer. Writing is really for everyone. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Now, I mean, and writing might not be your thing. Music might be your thing, or dance. But we're all we're all communicators. Your thing might be oral storytelling. But if you are at all interested in learning how to effectively communicate what happened to you, just to say that you can take what happened to you and extrapolate it into fiction. But I think any kind of writing, whether you're writing a play or a poem or memoir, you have to feel strongly what you're writing about. It has to matter. So your preoccupations, your obsessions, the things that keep you up at night, to transmit those into, the magic of writing is that you're taking a lived experience, translating it into squiggles on a page, and if you give it to somebody else, they can read those squiggles and feel something of what you felt and see where you were. That's the idea with creative writing, that you're writing it like a home movie, except you've also got the sense of smell. So you're not saying the overview and telling people what happened. You're showing them what happened. This is where I was. That's who was there. This was their tone of voice. This is how they moved across the room. This was the texture of the sofa. And the more detail you get into your, the taste of the food, the more detail you get, the more the potential reader, well, first of all, the more you can revisit that scene and find new information, but also giving it to somebody else, they can immerse themselves in the scene and be there right next to you in the scene. So it's really about paying attention to those details. Obviously, you can write the overview, but it's a good practice to write the sensory lived experience and without the interpretation, without the analysis.
Dawn, I want to ask you about writing about difficult things, which you touched on earlier, and you spoke about it in the context of sort of, especially if someone is supported, um, writing about, so let's say, we've done this show, we've encouraged people to write, and there are audience members out there who want to try to explore writing down difficult experiences.
Yes.
But I was wondering in terms of, how important is it to have someone or a community of support? Is there anything people should be careful of if they want to try and write about something? The experience of writing it down could also be traumatic in itself. And so I think what I'm saying is I don't just want to send them all onto the page unprotected. So I wanted to sort of ask you about that.
So first of all, on our website, on our homepage, we have a resource list. You can click through to a resource list where, and I think it's quite comprehensive. If you need help in any department, there are organizations all over outside South Africa, and a lot of them have free helplines, so you can phone and get support. You can also go to our website and do our audio course. And as part of the audio course, you can join groups. We meet online regularly, so you can do this from anywhere in South Africa. So you can do the audio course. There's 16, 17 modules. If you can afford to pay for it, you help sponsor other people who can't afford to pay for it. If you can't afford to pay for it, you just get hold of Terry, our administrator. All the details are there, and you apply for either full sponsorship or a discount. Or you can come on a course and then you have the group process to support you while you write. And it's really amazing when people start reading to each other on the second, third day of the course. People are always terrified to share their reading, share their work, to read their work. And I promise you it's the best part of the course. Once you get over that fear of showing up and for yourself and showing who you are, and you realize, first of all, that you're not nearly, that fake news person in your head that says, oh, this is terrible and nobody's going to understand and it's the worst writing ever. And you suddenly realize that people are identifying with what you said. They are laughing at the funny bits, they're crying at the sad bits, and it's so encouraging. And there's something about being witnessed, being seen, being heard, that's also really, really helpful, the things that happen to us. Rather than bottling it up in this vague blur inside your body, getting it out into the world, first by writing for yourself and then by reading and having it witnessed in a group where there's confidentiality, there's support, people are sharing their own work as well. So it's not just a one-way process, you also get to comment on other people's work as well in a respectful and honest way.
Yes, and I wanted to say, with the safety of a group or the safety of people reading or hearing your stories is so important. I mean, when I started the show and I started bringing authors and survivors on, and specifically, and I think some of them have actually, been through the Life Writing Collective courses. But the thing that niggled me was women who wrote about their past or domestic violence, which are really important stories. We know we need to break the silence to break the stigma.
Sure.
But I remember my initial reactions, and the question every time was like, oh my word, what did your family say? Did anyone stop speaking to you? How, and again, you can experience that almost physically as you writing down these sort of, I think, secrets, as we want to call them. So
Sure.
my next question is really about safe spaces and about creating a safe space. So we've written, you've written something. Should writers or people at home be wary or careful about who they share their writing with, and how important is it to have a safe space to share that writing?
Very, very important question. So first of all, you only write what you're ready to write. There's a story in my own life, a core story of my life that I've only now been able to write, and I've been living it for the past 30 years. So, there's the right time to write it for yourself. Once you start writing it for yourself, I encourage you to write it all. There's the worst part of the inner critic is the censor that says you're not even allowed to think that thought, let alone write it. But if you don't write it all down as bearing witness to your own life, you might not be able to get where you're where the writing wants to take you. You know, if you keep censoring yourself, you keep interrupting that creative flow. Later on, you decide who you're going to share it with, and you might choose not to share it with anybody. You know, but if you do share it, you choose. Certainly on the courses, you choose what you're going to share and what you're not going to share. And I mean, you can burn it afterwards. I don't recommend that. You know, if you're really worried that the children are going to get hold of it, but you can lock it away. But because in 10 years' time, you'll look back on that writing and think, whoa, that's who I was. That's a gift to yourself for the future, you know. And at that point, it might be okay to show people. But the other thing is that if you're writing about real people who are still alive, you can fictionalize them, you can change gender, you can change circumstances, you can change, you know, age group, or there are ways around that if you are writing very sensitive material. There's no hard and fast rule. You know, you just have to work out what you're prepared to put out into the world, if anything, and what you're prepared to live the consequences of that. And the consequences can be that some people are encouraged and helped, and other people might not like what you put into the world. You know, you can't please everyone. Question is, are you pleasing yourself? You know, for starters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a very important question, and a process, I think, to get there. You also said something earlier, and I want to bring it up again. You know, it's about, you know, your birthright. It's our birthright to be creative, and also looking at, it's important to unpack our relationship with the circumstances and environments that we were born into. You know, South Africa, we come from a legacy of oppression, of apartheid. And within that, a lot of stories were suppressed. I think across gender, you know, historically around the globe, across gender and across race, there were stories that were not told, that were specifically destroyed. You know, it's information is dangerous. And the Life Writing Collective looks to also help people publish their stories. Those stories are important. So I wanted to ask how important it is for us, not just for ourselves and for healing, but on a broader scale, for us actually to get our stories out there.
No, I think it's hugely important, you know, because we're actually rewriting history. You know, the history is always written by the victor, and more people are putting out stories of, you know, what was silenced before. And I think that's incredibly important. But, you know, I do recommend that you learn the basic skills. So the Life Writing Collective, for example, I mean, we're not the only people, obviously, give you the skills to write your story, but so that you can communicate it effectively and break open this idea that there's only one way to tell a story, because they're very creative ways of getting your life story down and communicating to other people.
Dawn, I want to ask, so on the website, it says that it's not, and we have spoken, you know, but I've mentioned language and grammar, but you said it's not only about learning sort of writing skills, that writing can also help you in other ways within your life. And I've always also said, you know, writing is really about critical thinking. So those skills, a lot of our work now in the information age is really writing emails or texts or WhatsApp or social media, etc. All of that, again, is writing down things. What are some of the ways that life writing, what are some of the other skills and tools that life writing teaches you aside from just the act of writing?
Yes. So what I've found personally, and also as I say, we've done a qualitative research project where we interviewed, medical students interviewed 20 people who've done the course to find out whether, you know, we say that writing is healing, and they went to investigate this, and we've just submitted the paper to a journal, and I'm very confident that it's going to be published because it's amazing, if I can say so myself. And the kind of things that people say is that it got them to reconsider things like their relationships improved, they felt more confident, they felt seen and heard, they met people that they normally wouldn't meet in their ordinary life, and so they grew compassion and tolerance and curiosity around the other people in the room, you know, that was pretty much across the board. They got released from that terrible fake news voice in their heads that said they were no good. They were surprised by how well they could write. You know, just given a few, there's just 2 mistakes that beginner writers make. And once you sort those out, people get into the flow and the most amazing stories come out. I have to say, often way better than writing that does get published. I think it helps in every area of one's life, you know, because if you're communicating better with yourself and growing confidence in yourself, you're better able to communicate in relationship and at work and in your community. You can stand up in your own shoes and say, hang on, I don't like what's going on here, rather than, you know, going under, and that thing of going under your own weight of your own story.
Dawn, okay, before we've got 1 minute left, before we go, I just want to know what the 2 mistakes are that new writers often make.
Well, I hope I can remember them now. So the one is writing out what you know, writing out of your thinking brain rather than your lived sensory experience.
Okay.
And the other one, I always do this to myself. You have to either do the audio course or come on a course to find out what the other one is. There you go.
Okay, that's perfect. Dawn, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. I think everybody can see the Life Writing Collective website is flashing on the screen. Please go there if you are interested. And Dawn, thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you so much, Lenina, for your important work.
We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. Now we are almost at the end of our hour together, but before we go, I am going to share with you some of the readings and writing tips that have helped me in my personal writing and healing. So let's go have a look. Hello, I'm so excited to be chatting about some of my favorite topics today, which is reading and writing, and most especially reading and writing for healing. So we're going to start by going through a few books by authors who have been on the show, who speak about GBV and who have written memoirs, just to get you into the swing of things about how to start writing about trauma. So one of the first books that I'm going to tell you about is by Desiree Ann Martin, and it's called We Don't Talk About It Ever. And it's a really important memoir because Desiree Ann Martin details her life from when she was very young, speaking about some of the domestic violence that she experienced within her home. But the title of the book speaks about the fact that there is a culture of silence around domestic violence and around violence in general, and it just talks to the impact that silence had on her in the rest of her life, which includes a drug addiction and her way of moving through that and healing and going on to become what she is now, a counselor and working with survivors. It's a really good book and I would recommend it. A second book that we're going to look at is called My Shack by Lynn Kirchhoff. Now, Lynn Kirchhoff came onto the show a while ago to speak about child sexual assault. She herself was sexually assaulted by an uncle when she was 10 years old, and she writes about the effect that it had on her life. It writes about the family dynamics when a child is sexually abused, what that means for the family, and also what a rape trial looks like for a very young child, and then goes on to, again, the rest of her life, how she started speaking out about it, how she managed to find healing, and how she's still processing a lot of those things. And the third book that we are looking at now is Glowfly Dance by Jade Gibson. And Jade speaks also about the effect of domestic violence on children. She was a child when her mother was murdered by her stepfather. So we are looking at femicide and also the journey of a woman who's experiencing domestic violence that ends in femicide and what that was like for Jade. And so we have profiled these three books as an example or a starting point for you to go and have a look at how other authors have written about their trauma. And as the authors came onto our show, they spoke about the healing nature of writing about their trauma. They speak about the healing nature of writing about vulnerability and of breaking the silence.
And so as we look through these books, though, and we move on to possibly, if you feel comfortable, writing about your journey and your vulnerabilities, I'm going to state one of the first things is that when you are reading these books, to understand that before a book gets published, it goes through quite a few hands. It goes through a professional editor. And so even though the stories might look very polished, first drafts never are. If you decide that you want to start writing about your trauma, the way I do it is I journal in private journals. I just write out my thoughts, I write out what happened, I write out my feelings, and I leave it there. And I do that because for me, writing is a form of release. And the second tip that I'm going to leave you with is write like you speak. So writing is very intimidating. When you do write it down, there's a book called The Artist's Way that speaks about shitty first drafts. The first draft always looks terrible, but it has no bearing on the healing aspects of writing. And so that's as much as I have time for right now. So I'm going to leave you there. Happy writing, happy healing.
And that's all we have for today. Keep writing, keep healing. I'm Lenina Rassool. Goodbye.